here with me tonight. There's a huge event tonight, and I'm super excited for it. But if you're a first time creator hoping to get your first exposure to comics publishing, a rising talent building your audience, or just an old grizzled pro like me, we welcome you to Comic Book School, where we talk about the craft and business of making comics. My name is Buddy Scalera, and I'm the founder of Comic Book School, a place where people just like you can go to learn about the craft and business of making comics. I'm also a comic book writer and a publisher with nearly 30 years in the comic book business. But tonight, we will unpack the creative secrets behind the upcoming graphic novel, Screaming for Vengeance, which is based on the double platinum album 1982 by Judas Priest, also coincidentally named Screaming for Vengeance. The set list of this album includes heavy metal classics, including Electric Eye, Take These Chains, Screaming for Vengeance, and of course, the radio friendly smash that broke down barriers across the globe for heavy metal artists all over the world. You've got another thing coming. So, to do this right, I'm going to be joined by the heavy metal master of comics, Brian Pulido, publisher of Coffin Comics and the creator of comics like Lady Death, La Muerta, and Evil Ernie, just to name a few. You can't have a more heavy metal guest than Brian Pulido. Brian, welcome to the show.
Buddy, thank you so much for having me on this historic evening. The idea that the work of Judas Priest and their lyrical content has come to life is absolutely phenomenal. And who better to do it than these young upstarts who are just taking the world by storm? This is going to be a great exploration tonight. Thank you so much for including me.
Hey, Brian, this is one of I think is it your second or third visit to the show?
Something like that.
Something like that. I will tell you, after what you just said, though, Brian, I think the one word that was missing was finally being adapted into a story, because you said before the show they are one of the most visual bands, right?
Yeah, I believe. I mean, I speaking for myself personally, I've adored Priest since 1978, and particularly records like this, "Screaming for Vengeance," "Defenders of the Faith," very evocative, amazing lyrical content, and extraordinarily visual. So this is very timely that this particular record is being turned into graphic novel form, because next year, on July 17th, it'll be the 40th anniversary. And as you mentioned, such incredible songs with amazing visual potential. I'm just very excited to see what these crafty creators have concocted for the world.
Wow, that was very Stan Lee-ish of you. I like
Yes.
the alliteration. Real quick, I'm going to just pull up the cover. This is the cover to the forthcoming graphic novel. We'll be bringing our other guests on, but when you talk about visual, and we do have some pages from this, we'll talk about the craft and business. This iconic image was blazoned across record stores when you bought albums or tapes or even 8 tracks at that point. It is such an iconic visual that it was amazing to me that it took so long to become graphic novelized.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's true. But now is the time. So good for all of us that we get to experience this. I mean, this particular company's been really lighting things up with a lot of music-based graphic novels and has a multitude of approaches. And I'm very interested in this one because if I understand it correctly, this Screaming for Vengeance storyline is an entire storyline as opposed to broken down into smaller stories per song. So I'm very interested in seeing.
Yeah, this is a publisher that is making waves and really connecting the dots between a rock and roll attitude and actually making comics. And you can see what they did where they had Motley Crue, of course, Gorillaz, and of course the Judas Priest, which we will unpack right now. And I don't want to keep people waiting too much longer in the green room because there's nothing to eat back there. So let's get started with a longtime friend and the writer. Neil Kleid. Neil, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Neil, one question. How'd you land such a sweet gig?
How did I land a sweet gig? So I got lucky, actually. It's funny because we're going to talk about Judas Priest, and we're going to talk about the inspiration for the book and everything behind it. But I'm going to sort of confess something. I was not a Judas Priest guy before I started working on Screaming for Vengeance. I grew up with a really weird, not weird, but like different kind of take on music. Unlike Brian, who you've been kind of like immersed in. Hi, Brian. Sort of immersed in it. But I like was a Jewish kid in suburban Michigan, and I listened to a lot of Jewish music. And then I listened to a lot of like top 40 stuff. And I really didn't get into like hard rock or heavy metal until I was really in college and beyond. Even starting with just like Aerosmith and and Nine Inch Nails and going from there. But Judas Priest was one of those albums that actually scared the crap out of me. Not albums, bands that scared the crap out of me. And I think, as Brian, as you said, because they were so visual, and you walk down the aisle at some record shop and you see just the album covers and how just intense they were, and also, oh, sorry,
I was going to chime in on that. A British Steel, which is one of the biggest Priest records, features a hand chomping down on a razor blade, so I could empathize with that premise.
Yeah, so like it scared me, and also because I was a Jewish kid, the name alone, Judas and Priest, really kind of, it was just they were just one of those bands that I was like, you know what, not for me. And Rantz Hoseley, who we're going to meet in a minute, who's my co-writer on the book, he actually brought me into the project when it was ramping up, because we've known each other for years and we wanted to always work together. And he kind of brought me in from more of a narrative point of view. And the idea was, he had this really great idea for Screaming for Vengeance in general, the story, how it was going to go, and how we were going to create this epic tale. And he basically said to me, look, I'm like a huge fan. I've been, a heavy metal guy for a long time, and I need you to really keep me on track and make sure that we're not screwing up the story. So there's this really nice balance of him coming in with the source and inspiration, and me coming in with, having written a bunch of comic books and having, worked on narrative and keeping sources. And he's also, a fantastic writer also. And from that, I actually kind of got into Judas Priest once he basically said, hey, here's Screaming for Vengeance. Here's a playlist. Go listen to it. And from there, I moved on to Defenders of Faith. And, I'm just kind of listening now almost nonstop. So that's how I got into it, and I'm excited.
Before we keep Rantz in the green room, which I don't know if you know this, Brian, because you weren't back there very long. There's no oxygen in there, so Rantz has been holding his breath the entire time. I'm going to bring him on the screen. Rantz Hoseley, welcome to the show, and I hope the oxygen was refreshing.
It's so nice to be able to breathe again.
Rantz, welcome to the show. Senior editor of Z2 Comics. Comic book writer and filmmaker. Also, you're actually a filmmaker. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's lovely to be on.
Yeah, and it's great to see you. And I will say for myself, and I'm sure Brian shares a similar sentiment, thank you for bringing a vision like this to the page, especially now at a time where independent comics are, I would say, in some sort of golden age. So thanks for whatever you did to get this out there.
Well, we do a bunch of different genres of music in terms of the books that we do. We have everything from Charlie Parker and the Gorillaz to we're doing a last podcast on the left book, and we do bands like Poppy and and baby metal and stuff. So but myself and Josh Bernstein are absolutely the metalheads. Josh created the Golden Gods Awards, so like he's metal is in his blood, so we have a grand time talking about like, okay, who's next, which band do we chase next, and getting to do bands like Anthrax and Dio and Motley Crue are all phenomenal. And I kind of said that I wasn't going to write, I wasn't going to write any books, because that's just being greedy, because I'm supposed to be the editor. And when we got the license to Judas Priest, and they made it really clear, like because usually when we approach a label or management or the band, we're like, what's important to you on this? What's important from a narrative point of view? What's important from art? Because we want these to really feel like a logical extension of their catalog, rather than just feel like a merch cash-in kind of thing. We really want it to ring true to the fans and to have the band feel proud of what comes out. So, and one of the things that was made very clear to us is that we need hardcore fans. We like the people who are in this have to love this. And the first comic story I ever wrote when I was 15 or 16 years old was when I was on a family road trip to Los Angeles for the first time, and I had my Walkman, and I was listening nonstop to Screaming for Vengeance and Defenders of the Faith, and I wrote out this entire epic saga that of what is a bloodstone, and why do you have to take these chains away, and and going into with Defenders of the Faith, the apex of the story, and the cataclysm of the Sentinel and stuff. So and I mean, I wore those tapes out because like I had been a fan of Priest since Hellbent for Leather and British Steel and Sin After Sin and all of that, but like Screaming for Vengeance was just a complete revelation. It was on a whole nother level that no one was ready for in terms of the music, in terms of the design, the cover that Doug Johnson painted and designed was so unheard of for both an album cover but also a metal album cover, and it kind of changed the visual lexicon for heavy metal design for quite a few years after that. And I know for myself, and I know a lot of other artists and designers who were hugely influenced by that was the thing that you would draw on your notebook in class, trying to figure out like, how the hell does he do that? Oh my God, like look at those, how does the wing fit together and all that? So when this came up, I was like, I think we presented a bunch of writers, and I presented myself as part of it, and I said like, here's what I think it should be, and Judas Priest management said, no, you need to do it, because and like Neil said, the problem that you can have when you love something so much is that you lose your objectivity to it. And I wanted to make sure, like, one of the things that's critical for us is that if we're writing and creating stories, and that pardon the term, that they also serve as a gateway drug for new fans to come into the band, that are fans that can pick it up as a comic book and as a compelling story and go, oh my God, if this is what this band generates, let's see then like what the band's about. Let's listen to some tracks and stuff. So that's one of the reasons also that we, in our deluxe editions, do vinyl pack-ins of 180 gram vinyl special editions and things like that. So Neil's my guy who because we worked together on some other projects, and that because of the nature of television development didn't go all the way that we would have liked to, but it was very apparent from that process that Neil and I worked very well together as a writing team, and I wanted someone who could keep me honest from a storytelling standpoint and
call him on his bullshit, basically.
And that's exactly it.
So Rantz, you said something early on, and I think it's really important. For the audience that we have here, they are probably writers or artists who are trying to improve their craft. You said something really important, like how do you do justice to this kind of material? How do you ensure that the fans like Brian Pulido, who know this material with encyclopedic knowledge, have an appreciation of the material, and it's not just fluff? Like, how do you ensure that it is a substantial piece that will please the loyalists?
Well, I think I think that it's the biggest challenge as an editor is to find the right person, because you need to find someone who loves the band or gets the band, that understands it, and not just like, oh, that's an interesting track, but they have to understand, like, why does a fan come back again and again to these albums? And that's true regardless of what band it is. There are bands that I absolutely could not edit because the band is so far out of my wheelhouse in terms of, and I like a huge variety of music, but there are definitely like spots where I'm like, I could not tell you why someone has gone to 80 concerts of this band. And that's fine, like, because there's different tastes for different people. But as a result, you need to get a team, first of all, that gets why that band speaks to a fan, because that's one of the universal things with music is that, you know, you feel at its best, you feel like that band has made these songs just for you, and there's something very deep and personal in that experience of it. So, and it's also a very individual experience. So part of the challenge of it is figuring out a story that's going to respect that's going to be true to the fans' experience, you know, like what appeals to them, but also leaves the space for them to still have their association and their memory, and not to be like kind of brutalizing it into like, well, this is what it is, damn it. And it, you know, it's a challenge in it, because you have to find someone who's not only a huge fan of the band, who gets the band, but also has kind of the grace and a deft hand in the storytelling to be able to not just go for the ham-handed obvious shtick. Because to me, I think that there have been rock-based comic books and graphic novels in the past where that is absolutely the approach that's taken, and those companies aren't around anymore. And I think that that's a large reason, because it's like, if you just go for like, oh well, we'll do this because it's the obvious thing, you know, it comes across as commerce rather than coming across as, you know, having a genuine authorial impulse to tell a story that really, you know, grabs you by the throat. So
I think it also kind of goes a little bit beyond that. Now I'm going to kind of expand that to storytelling in general and comics specifically, because I had the same conversation today with an editor where we were talking about, you know, something completely different, and talking about characters and talking about a universe and talking whatever. And there's this sense of, you know, I think it was Stan Lee who said, you know, everybody's comic book is their first. Every comic book is somebody's first, and every comic book is somebody's last. I'm totally misquoting that, but the idea that, you know, every story you tell, especially if you have a rabid fan base, or a fan base that really loves something or knows something, you also have to balance it out with a reader who's coming in who doesn't know it at all, right? So, you know, let's talk about, I don't know, the Spider-Man movie came out this week, right? So the Spider-Man movie. So you have people who come in who have seen every Spider-Man movie, have seen know Spider-Man because they've been reading the comics for years, and, you know every little cameo and character. And then you have somebody like, I don't know, my wife, who does not read Spider-Man comics, who is sort of a casual, oh, I've seen the movies because, you know, I like Andrew Garfield, or I like this person, and has kind of watched them over the years and says, I want to see it, but won't get every little thing that I would get, right? So you have to create a story for somebody, and Judas Priest is, you know, just to kind of bring it back to Screaming, you know, you've got readers and writers like Rantz or Brian, who are really huge Judas Priest fans, giant heavy metal fans. And then you've got somebody like me, who is like a new heavy metal fan, who's somebody who's kind of found an appreciation of it because, you know, of circumstances, or because I was exposed to Screaming for Vengeance through Rantz. And so you want to be able to craft every story you want to craft has to satisfy both.
absolutely.
Now, Brian, when I think of the work that you've done, would you do a lot of research when you'd approach a project like this? Or, like, for example, looking at the song list like Rantz was talking about? Or would you take a different approach as a storyteller if you were brought in to tell this kind of narrative about such an iconic band?
Well, just speaking for myself and keeping it brief, because the focus is really on these guys. I mean, I had the luxury of working with Megadeth on cryptic writings of Megadeth, and I simply went to Dave after our deal was struck and say, well, how would you like to approach this? And I pitched back to him the premise that each in this case, each song was a story, and he liked that idea. So we expanded each song into different stories. So, for example, there's a song on the first record called Mechanics. And so we did an assassination story, et cetera, et cetera. But that actually leads into the question that I want to ask the guys, which is, there's what you guys want to do, and then there's what best represents the band. How do you guys navigate that territory, and how much input or how little input is the band having on the project? Let's start with Neil, please.
So actually, we should probably start with Rantz, because Rantz has been
Rantz.
Rantz has been more sort of boots on the ground day to day with the band and their representatives. I will say that from my point of view, as Rantz and I, as he mentioned, we work really well together, and we spend a lot of time pre-writing, so doing a lot, having story conversations, and really talking about influences. And Rantz kind of told me where he was coming from, what he wanted to do, and that really inspired a lot of ideas that I had. And we threw around. This book is inspired by everything. It's inspired by the Bible, by Dune, by Deadwood, Game of Thrones, like everything. And there's this sense of like, hey, we want to do this really sweeping, epic sci-fi tale, but like, how much do we have to, as Brian's asking, like, how much do we have to represent the band? Like, do they need to be characters? Do we need to bring in lyrics? Like, so Rantz, you kind of navigated a lot of that for us, right? Because, well,
yeah, I mean that's usually the early. So Josh Bernstein, who's the head of A&R for Z2, and whoever the editor is assigned to a project, there's usually an early kickoff meeting after the ink is dry, and it's like, okay, what's the state of play for you guys? What's important to you? Not just in terms of look and feel and style, but also does the band want to be in the story? Do they want to be represented in there? Would they prefer not to be? Do you want one big epic story that engulfs the entire album, or would you rather have kind of an all-star jam situation where you have, like Brian was saying, doing the kind of anthology approach where each song becomes a different story,
like your project?
Yeah, and it really just depends on the band, and the relationship also with the band. Like in the case with Motley Crue, Nikki and I worked together on adapting the Heroin Diaries when I was at Heavy Metal, and I've done a couple of music videos for his band 6 a.m. and for Motley Crue. And when we got to the point of talking about doing a Motley Crue graphic novel, the pitch actually came from Nikki. He said, he's like, I've got this idea and it's really insane, but I think it's good. And we were like, this is completely crazy. And yeah, okay, let's do this. So, and there are bands that are very involved in the story process because of the nature of their music, of the nature of the kinds of stories that they tell within their songs. That they're very productive and they have very real, concrete, feelings about that. Other bands just want to see, like, okay, like generally this is kind of what we're thinking, and you riff with it. With Judas Priest, like I had some really exacting ideas of what I wanted this book to accomplish as a fan and as a writer, and as a creator, and like Neil said, we're pulling everything from Deadwood to Inky Bilal and Moebius into this. Like there's very much I wanted very much for this to have the feel of that classic 1980s French graphic novel, where it's this huge epic science fiction world that is both thrilling and terrifying to be a part of. And tapping into all kinds of old classic science fiction, everything from Brave New World to It Can't Happen Here to Dune to Foundation, and then ironically, while we're in the process of this, Dune comes out and Foundation comes out, and it's just like going, okay, well, I guess there's something in the air that we're right with this, but it really, I did a 2-page treatment that then went to the band, and they had 3 notes that they wanted changed. One was a character name, like they were like, this needs to be changed, this needs to be changed, and the character's name isn't metal enough. So give us a name that's more metal.
Fun note.
No, and and they're very like Priest has been great because it's like they don't. There are a lot of bands that won't, for whatever reason, they won't speak plainly about like what they don't like about it, and if Priest doesn't like something, they let us know immediately. So which is phenomenal because it's like you can understand it, you can correct it, and you can stay on track with it. So yeah,
there was a lot of finding and replacing that day.
There was.
Now, if it's okay, I want to show a little bit of the art. This will be brand new to you, Brian. I got to see this a little bit in advance. And Rantz or Neil, if you'd like to narrate through what we're seeing here and why certain art was selected. I hate the way this lays out, but it kind of actually landed perfectly in the middle of the screen.
This is like the first. This is like the first 10 pages, I think.
Yeah.
So this is the first page of the book, and the next two pages, which is a double page spread, which has the Hellion bursting out of the shattered remains of Madison Square Garden.
Wow.
That was our test page. Like we had 3 artists that were in consideration, and we gave them the test page and said, please draw this, let us, and then we sent those pages to Priest management, and they said, this is the person that we want to have draw.
I mean, look at this art. I mean, Brian, did this not like come through and be exactly what you would want to see? I mean,
yeah, I could totally see. Well, in panel 4, I could kind of, am I seeing the electric eye? And
that is exactly it. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Wow.
So the Priest fan Easter egg in this is that Priest was banned from playing Madison Square Garden for a decade and a half
I didn't know that.
because Priest fans during the Defenders of the Faith tour completely destroyed Madison Square Garden. They just tore it apart. It ended up doing something like $500,000 worth of damage to the seats and to the arena. So Priest was like, so we felt like it was appropriate to have the base where the Hellion is built and it erupts out of.
Did you see that quote there at the bottom? More metal sounds like a line from Spinal Tap. That's actually very funny. And you got a super dope. By the way, this is the artist who created the promo that you saw today on Instagram. So if you haven't seen that yet, it's pretty great. But let's go back to some of the art here. So page 4, very heavy metal, right?
Yeah, this art is by Christopher Mitten, who Neil worked with on the Eisner and Harvey award-winning comic book tattoo.
Yeah, it was nice. We got the band back together.
Yeah,
which was kind of great.
And Dee Cunniffe is the colorist. And the great thing is, like, I feel like we've got a really solid team that everyone is very dedicated to not pulling punches on this. Like if we're all pretty open with each other on like, well, you know what, I don't think that's good enough. Let's do it better. Let's do it better. So and I think that the results are really showing in the finished work, and I'm really I keep joking this will be the graphic novel that I retire from writing on, because like after that, like what do I do?
You know? I mean, this page alone was really cool because we wanted to follow the course of this. That's really like a water tube or kind of a liquid, like a Coke bottle for the world, and we wanted to really follow its path from kind of like the top of the city down to the bottom of the city. And when we did the panel descriptions, we didn't really kind of tell Chris, hey, you know, these panels should be vertical and you should really kind of see it fall. And you can almost see it, you know, if you go from each of those panels, it's kind of getting lower and lower as you go. And he really just choreographed this beautifully. Yeah. So,
and Brian, you've published hundreds of this is very mature artwork, isn't it? I mean, this is
I mean, if the objective was, you know, French European graphic novel, I think mission accomplished. The storytelling is lovely. I mean, even without too many words and captions, you can really, you know, it's expressed. Yeah, really beautiful stuff.
Yeah,
and that was also kind of, and you know, all credit goes to Rantz. That was kind of a key driver, was like less is more, right? Let's show more than we tell. Even that first sequence that you saw with, Madison Square Gardens, that sequence before you get here into the city. I mean, I think I overwrote the hell out of it, right? We had lyrics in it, and it originally had a bunch of kind of lyrics from Electric Eye, and Rantz basically came back and said this would be a lot more impactful if we just really let the art speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the art
we,
really breathes in a lot
yeah.
of these, right? I mean, although this, it breathes, but like you can see a lot of negative space built in there, even though it's detailed. This artist clearly is
Yeah.
controlling the eye on the page.
And this is like this double page spread here where Shane is moving through he's moving through the scene, which is this giant underground refinery system. And for one of the edicts when Neil and I started going on it, I was going, let's try and do as many like double page spreads with insets as possible. Because like just for me personally, it always feels so much bigger. Like the world immediately feels grander and larger and bigger when you have these double page spreads and you have
Yeah.
inset panels that move the character through it, because it immediately removes the limitation that you have in doing the kind of staccato beats of panel to panel to panel to panel kind of thing. So.
Right, like here, watching Shane just kind of like jump through this machinery and kind of get from point A to point B, and we do this a lot, and we don't do it just kind of arbitrarily. We really picked our moments to basically say like this sequence would need a double page spread. So we really it's not like every other page, but it
Right.
really helped us kind of establish that sense of motion.
And then this is the last of the preview pages. Again, a nice like a palette cleanser from the previous page, where now you get back to a more human level story.
Well, I think part of it too is that I always thought that comics and music make the most sense as a simpatico kind of partnership, because it's all about rhythm. For me, like if you do a series of like small narrow frames and you're going bam 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 bam, that's the staccato of a drum, doing that, and all of those things have a rhythmic translation between the two of them, and if you're conscious of that in it, like it makes a lot of sense in terms of there's you have a big low wide panel, and that's your big drop D chord that rings out for an 8 count, and it makes it ironically makes, I feel like, more translation sense in a lot of ways than it does with film, because film has its own thing, and you can amplify film with music. But the thing I love about music-based comics, if they're done right, it actually allows you to kind of dissect the music and kind of allows you to slow the moment down and kind of live with it for a little bit. So,
yeah, I mean, that's what I love about comics in general. Comics in general, as a medium, you can really kind of craft the pacing in a sense where you've got the page turn, you've got the 9-panel grid, you've got there's so many tools at your disposal as a writer, as an artist, as a creator, that I think music, as to what Rantz just said, it's just such a great analogy, and this one was really a lot of fun because we looked at it, not just basically taking Judas Priest, and Screaming for Vengeance, the story, the arcs of the songs, but really looking at it as an album and understanding just kind of like how you really transition from song to song and how you transition from page to page and what's kind of like the scale of that.
So Neil, as a person coming in fresh to Judas Priest,
yes, sir,
and balancing out Rantz, do you think that balance created a better product? And do you think that your freshness to the music was an advantage to the team? And how did that dynamic work when you guys were writing?
I mean, I would say so. I think the nice thing about the relationship that Rantz and I have, the kind of the partnership we have, is, and even on the other thing that we worked on before this, we each kind of bring our own unique worldview to the partnership. Right? Rantz is very, very immersed in film lore and immersed in music. I'm maybe a little bit more immersed in comic books and literature, and we each kind of have our own life, our own life experiences that really help create a much better product, right? So, we said it really at the top of this, that he brought the love of Judas Priest and the love of heavy metal and the knowledge of the lyrics and the knowledge of what the songs are, and what the album is trying to tell. And for me, it was really about like, here is, narratively what I think we can bring. Here's things that I've seen, that I've done before, that I've seen have done before. And being able to kind of bring both of those different unique worldviews really does make the product better. I would have loved to also have come in as somebody who loved the source material, or was maybe, I do love it, but more like knowledgeable about it. And if, it had been another band, maybe that would be the case. But as a writer, and I'm going to make this about craft a little bit, as a working writer, sometimes you don't have that luxury, right? Sometimes you come in and somebody says, hey, I love your writing. I think you'd be great on this. What do you know about it? And sometimes you're like, well, I got to do my research. Years ago, I was actually reached out to by somebody at DC, and they said, hey, we want to do a Vampire's Diary comic. Have you watched it? And I'm like, sure, why not? And there was that moment where I'm like, how much of the Vampire's Diary can I watch tonight so that I can get up and running? And in the end, I didn't. But sometimes that's what it is, right? I just actually today have a prose X-Men story that just came out in a book today. And I had to actually cram tons of X-Men history into my head to try to get the pitch done and the story done. And there was a lot, X-Men continuity isn't easy. And you kind of have to sometimes do that as a writer. Sometimes there's this like, look, I'm not familiar with this, but I'm going to get familiar with this because I believe in it and I've got a great story that I want to tell or that I need to tell.
Now, Brian, I know your nickname is Mr. Vampire Diaries. You were about to say something.
I like the movie Near Dark, if that gives you an idea of the type of vampires I like.
I think it's a different interpretation of vampires. Yeah. You were about to ask a question, Brian, or make a comment, and then I
was just going to emphasize that, Rantz's choice of bringing Neil on board is a great choice, because it's wonderful, I believe, at least as a statement, to just have a fresh set of eyes. And writing is a craft. And when a writer is assigned, you just start doing your research. And I'm sure you were just pulling things from the material that Rantz didn't see, and that just probably helped your partnership. So I guess my question would be, given the track list of the wonderful Screaming for Vengeance, what maybe did you bring to the party that Rantz hadn't seen?
So, I have to go back and look at my notes. I do know, and Rantz, you can keep me honest here, I do know that the minute he sent me that link, the playlist link, I think I sent you like 7 to 9 emails just in like a row, which was just like, oh,
yeah,
like
my email box was blowing up for an hour as awesome. Neil had that experience. Like, so, oh, forget it. This is the best. No, wait, no, oh my god, and this trick too.
So. That's awesome.
So like individual stuff. There were things that we pulled in, some that made the book, some that didn't. I think one of the things that we both kind of felt was we didn't want to really rely heavily on like lyric after lyric after lyric, right? We didn't want this book to sort of like stand on the lyrics as dialogue. And we did pick a few moments where like this lyric like made sense, right? And sorry, my headphone just fell out. So it was really about looking deeper at the individual tracks and understanding kind of what they meant, right? So like, what do you mean when you say, the devil's child, or what do you mean when you talk about the electric eye? And some of that stuff actually really kind of moved me about the sense of control and the sense of, this, higher power at the end that's really kind of like capturing you, and you're kind of like forced to grapple with your own internal sorrow. There was a lot of stuff like that really helped the two of us as we really put the outline together, take this character Chain and take his story and really craft like the perfect narrative for him, right? So there's this character who you come in at the beginning of the graphic novel with, and is really kind of a little bit more fresh and a little like me. He comes in with, and I really related to him, right? You come in with innocent eyes, and by the end of the story is at just a completely different place because of the arc. So I think the tracks did that, but I also think the experience of, like we've all said, me having come in and not having been exposed to it first, I really like found myself in the character. So I think a lot of that was very helpful.
Yeah, this is the thing on the screen right now is my selfish desire as a child, as a teenager, that I wanted to have a Hellion statue. So when we started talking about the deluxe edition and what's going in, and there was questions about it, and I was like, well, how can there even be a question of it? Of course, we're going to do a chrome Hellion statue, and its eye has to light up. Like, I mean, come on, this is even, and everyone's like, yeah, all right, you're right.
Yeah, and I just and look at what you've done with the original, and how you've expanded it and made it into something that just looks so contemporary. I just think the art, and obviously the comments from the audience, people are really responding to this art.
One of the things I wanted to wrap on what Neil was saying and Brian's question on the approach of, if you don't know the material, and what can you bring to it. I'll say this as an editor, it's equally important to know when it's completely outside your wheelhouse and you're not the right fit for it. As an editor, I've had multiple books where we'll approach someone, and it's someone that I think would be a phenomenal writer or a phenomenal artist, and they'll say, let me think about this. And then they come back, like within a week, and they're like, well, you know what? I feel like I'm not going to get you what you need here.
Yeah.
Vampire Diaries, I'm telling you, Vampire Diaries. Not for me.
The thing is, there is the thing of the whole fake it until you make it thing. That works if you have confidence and believe in what the end result is, right? I'm a big believer in setting high standards for you that are not necessarily at where you're at in terms of performance at the point, and because it pushes you to a higher achievement level, and I think that's how you end up having a career. But I also love working with people who I know are going to be blunt and honest with me about, like, and I will want to work with that person more times. Like, I will go back to that person again and again, because I know that they're not going to bullshit me about, like, oh, no, I can handle this, it'll be fine. And then you get, the contract signed and you're weeks down the road, and they're just like, well, I don't know, do I have to do this? And, not that ever happens.
Rantz, since this is about the craft and the business of making comics, as an editor, and Brian, you as well as an editor and publisher, why don't we go with you first, Brian? What are your expectations of talent when you bring them in to work on a book published by Coffin Comics?
Well, I mean, let's see, if it's a writer, we've agreed on a direction ahead of time, and in a real practical sense, we'll start with a couple page outline. That way, from an editorial perspective, kind of know which way it's going to go, and then expect some sort of progress. And then in a very simple sense, for an illustrator, maybe a penciler, an inker, once the script is complete, we will request some layouts and maybe give some input, and largely just affirming what we've all agreed upon. And then we'll have coaching sessions and be communicating throughout the entire process, whether it be about design. And I guess in our case, if there's a script and then an illustrator comes on board, there might be an exhaustive amount of reference that an artist can use or not use. That way they're sort of loaded up, so to speak. That way, and all this stuff is designed more to inspire as opposed to control. It's just like, here's just a bunch of stuff for you to take in and see what it does, kind of get you on your way. And then there's the real practical considerations of what's the agreed upon rate of pages per week, and managing the promise. Is it being delivered? Is it not being delivered? Simple stuff like that. I'm sure
simple stuff, but not so simple in day-to-day of running a business. You would think it's simple, right? You make an agreement, you're going to turn in a number of pages, and then you're like, well, how many times can your grandmother die, right? Like, or, these are the kinds of things where you go, like, there's only so many times you can use that same excuse.
I mean, speaking for myself, 30 years in the game, it's not a perfect system, but we could kind of tell, right? So people have track record, and we really want to work with track record and experience. And I love giving artists breaks every year. it's great. But generally, what kind of keeps the wheels rolling are veterans, or just people who just display that professional acumen. And it's probably just from a personal choice too, because I'm just a beast. Like, I show up early, I work late, I love doing it. I've been doing it for 30 years, and if those people want to just keep up with the kid, you just got to do the work. So yeah, there's I guess for me editorially, there's two qualifications: phenomenal talent and professional. Just manage the promise, do what they say it would do, and even less is fine as long as it's consistent and it's knowable and it's promised.
Now to you, Rance. What are your expectations? Our community's full of talented people.
Okay, so I think first of all, from my standpoint, each book is different. I'm currently editing 25 books that will run me through quarter 1 of 23. And the thing that I learned, I was also a creative director in video games for 17 years. So like the thing that I learned was that communication of expectations at the beginning is vital, and clear parameters of like, here's the room you have to play. Here are the boundaries. Do not go outside of these. And that can be a million different things depending on what the project is. But a clear communication of like, here's where I want you to bring your creative juice to it, and here are the milestones, the icons, the moments that have to be in here because the client expects it. And the band is the client ultimately, and the fan is the client in that way. So we are at service to them in that regard. And then I communicate very clearly, like, here's deadlines, here's deliverables, here's milestones, here's when you invoice, all of that. And like Brian being doing this 30 plus years, and having worked on the other side of the fence as a freelance writer, as a freelance artist, and inker, and all of that, it's the classic line of don't bullshit a bullshitter. It's like when you can tell when someone is genuinely between a rock and a hard place, because you've been there. Like when there's actual veracity to what they're saying, and when they're just being flakes.
Yeah.
And I have very low patience for flakes. And usually I will give a chance to rectify. And I will make it clear that I'm giving you a chance to rectify this. But if you're going to dick around or find some excuse or flake or whatever, I will I do not hesitate anymore to cut someone off, to sever the deal, and to move along. And there's no emotion to that. There's no like, oh, I hate that person now, because it's business.
Yeah.
And when I was working at Disney, there was a producer who put it really well, because it's like there was a guy who was going through a lot of personal issues, and he was not doing his work. And I said, but he's going through all this stuff, and my boss said, yeah, but you do him no good whatsoever to not have him responsible for his own deadlines, for his to make excuses for him, because you're a nice person and you're doing this, but somewhere in his career, his expectation is going to be, I can keep doing this. And instead he needs to know that it's like there are consequences to actions. And if I'm going to flake, there's going to be a consequence, and it's probably going to be me losing my job. So at a certain point, you stop worrying about like, oh my God, but what if they don't like me if I if I'm mean to them? It's like, no, I am the creative arm of a business. I can't like, and like Brian said, a huge part of mitigating those kinds of issues is that you parcel out how many new people you take on a year, because on like editing 25 books, if I had new people on all of those books, I would be completely bald and insane.
Now, listen, I hate to cut this off, but guys, we're running out of time here. I'm going to show one more time real quick. I'm going to share the website where they can actually check out your awesome looking graphic novel. Here you go. I was able to get that with the minimum amount of muss and fuss, but here it is. It's on the z2comics.com website. We're going to go quick round robin. Brian, you go first. Where can they find you on social media?
On social media, just go to the old school website and all the socials are there. coffincomics.com. But can we do something really quick, buddy?
Yes.
Can we go and just say our favorite Judas Priest song really quick?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'll start. Victim of Changes and Painkiller.
So good.
Neil.
I mean, look, I'm new, but I still kind of love Hellion and Electric Eye. I think there's just something that's really great about it. I don't know.
There's a reason Judas Priest opens every concert with Electric Eye. So
Yeah.
Rantz.
Sentinel.
Nah,
I think like there's you've got 50 years of catalog to pull from, and there aren't bad songs in that catalog.
Right.
But that song, like, to me, that is such an evocative powerhouse of a song that immediately just draws an entire movie, in your head, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
And I would say, for me, Love Bites.
Great song.
Yeah.
No.
Yep.
Just
Right on.
never fails to get me up and moving. So, Brian, real quick, what should they be looking out for from you?
Let's see here. Coming up March 7th, Lady Death Necrotic Genesis on Kickstarter. If you could believe it's our 15th Kickstarter for Lady Death, 27th or 28th overall. I don't know. Next year, 2022, the whole year is dedicated to a company-wide storyline called World War Death. More about what's coming up in the new year. Thank you so much for having me.
Neil, where can they find you?
Twitter, Instagram, Neil Kleid. Very simple. That's pretty much where I'm at. I don't have a website or anything, but
but you do have a Wikipedia page.
I do have a Wikipedia page, and
I don't have a Wikipedia.
I don't have a Wikipedia page.
I have a Wikipedia page too, a Star Wars Wikipedia page.
I was impressed with that. Rantz, where can they find you?
Instagram is Rantz H, RANTZH. The Twitter is Mystery Creative, which is incredibly difficult because there's a creative is CR8TVE. And there's usually a lot of talking about film and comics and storytelling and general profanity.
Now, one question.
Profanity.
When we talk to our pros, and Brian, I don't know if we did this with you the last time you were on. We try to ask a question of everybody, and that question I'll put to all three of you, and then I'll pick on you. You'll be voluntold to go. I'll probably go with you first, Brian. What's one piece of advice that you wish that you had received early in your career?
Oh my Lord, I'm blanking. Early on my career, listen. I guess listen. As a younger person, I might not have listened as much. I might have been doing a lot of talking and telling and informing. I think time helped me learn to listen and submit to the intelligence of other people. So maybe listen.
That's a good one. Neil Kleid, what's one piece of advice?
I got two, actually. They're kind of tied together. The first one being a comics career or a writing career or any career. It's a marathon and not a sprint.
Nice.
There's no reason to rush. And then sort of tied to that is don't spend your career worrying about other people's work. Worry about the work you've got. Yeah.
Nice. And Rantz, the piece of advice.
It's similar to Neil's. It's a two-prong thing. It's one, treat every project like it's the most important thing that you've ever done, and that it will be the last thing that you ever do. And then the second it's done, realize that it doesn't matter. The biggest part of that is being able to separate your worth as an individual human being walking around this earth with the worth of what you create. And that's just years to learn that in progress, and because you have to, you put so much into your work as a creator on an hourly, daily, weekly, monthly basis that it's hard to not take it personally. Like if someone comments on your work, it's like they're commenting on me, and it's like, no, it's just the work. And when you get to the point of being able to, once you complete that, to be able to put aside your emotional connection to it and say, all right, this is out into the world. Now we're going to engage with the next thing. And how do I make this better? How do I take the lessons learned from that and increase and increase?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Guys, we're gonna jump because we're almost out of time and we're gonna lose our stream. Rantz Hoseley, thank you so much for joining. We're excited to see more awesome things for you. Neil, welcome back. Always a pleasure to see you and your amazing work. People should check out your novels and your graphic novels for sure. Hang out in the green room, eat the cookies, and hold your breath. So, Brian, thank you
Yes.
so much for joining. What did you think?
Thanks for having me. It was great. I was really interested in this company. I just like what they're doing. There's a new revolution out there. Companies are no longer tied simply to the old school archaic distribution system. And a company like this company and the work that they're doing, that direct to customer experience, is something that I'm acutely interested in and I'm part of. So I love seeing it. And I like how this company and in their work, I mean, everything these guys had to say, as a person who looks forward to reading this work, they said everything that I wanted to hear. I think they're coming from a really, really pure place where they're being really true to the artist and yet true to what they believe the lyrical content is almost commanding them to say. So this was great. I think I'm very, very excited for the project, and I'm very excited about that company as a whole.
And I think that, interestingly enough, Neil's lack of history with the graphic novel is that secret sauce.
Yeah.
That bit where he's not a fanboy. He's not trying to reclaim 1982. He's coming in here and saying, "Okay, what do I do with this now as a craftsperson?" And I think that was probably going to tilt it.
Absolutely. I think that's it's sort of a secret weapon in a sense too. I mean, myself being a fan or anyone being a fan, that's not a qualification. That's just an interest, and that Neil is a craftsperson and that he knows and recognizes that part of the craftsmanship of being a writer is research. And
Yeah.
so he could come in cold and really offer a very fresh perspective. So I thought those are all really excellent, excellent choices editorially.
Yeah, and I kind of when I saw the art, I kind of went, whew. Like I think you probably did the same thing, which was like, I'm glad they didn't mess this up.
It's interesting. I don't think there's been a ton of rock and roll comics done well because
Yeah.
for reasons I think that were pointed out today, is that frequently you have the artist in there and they're playing their instruments or their instruments or weapons, like all super goofy, out of turn stuff. And I think again, these guys are making the right choices, come from the right place, so that whether it's a fan or a casual fan or a new person, you can simply enjoy the ride of the story. Maybe a deep track fan will get some of those little extra notes. For example, it was pointed out that Judas Priest fans trashed Madison Square Garden. If you really thought about it, you see the Hellion coming out like that. There's a little quick story tangential to
Easter
that.
eggs, little Easter eggs, but if you can enjoy the whole narrative, I think that's the goal. And hey,
Yeah.
we're about to run out of time. Brian, thanks so much for coming. You are welcome back anytime. You are a terrific addition to the show.
Buddy, thank you so much for the opportunity. And all I got to say to you guys is happy holidays, everybody. Thanks so much.
Happy holidays, Brian. Thank you. And thank you for joining us tonight. As a fan of heavy metal and, of course, of all of the creators who were involved, this is a great pleasure. And I hope that you learn a lot from this as a storyteller on the page, trying to imagine what would you do if, as Neil said, you were dropped something in your lap and you had to tell a story. And that's the true craft of being a professional. And what you saw tonight were real professionals explaining their craft. Again, to echo Brian's sentiments, happy holidays. I hope you have a warm, safe holiday, and we will see you fresh in 2022. And keep making comics.